All right. Welcome back, Joon, the Psych Guys podcast. The other side of this epic t-shirt, look at this thing. This is the back side. Great new t-shirt. So along with our theme on gas station supplements, we are going to be talking about Delta-8 THC, which I remember walking to a gas station a couple weeks ago, and I turned to my left, and there was just weed right there. And I was like, what the fuck? What is going on? And the guy was like, it's Delta-8. It's legal.
It's not weed. Don't call it weed.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's just a different derivative, and how it's made is very interesting. So yeah, here we go. Delta-8. I guess, what did you know about Delta-8 before we really dove into the research?
Zero. I didn't know what Delta-8 was. I didn't know what Delta-9 was. Apparently, they have this new thing, Delta-10, which I still don't know much about.
Right.
But now, after doing the research for this podcast episode, I am familiar with Delta-8, Delta-9, and excited for this conversation today, my friend. By the way, for those of you who had no idea what Logan was talking about when he showed you the backside of the shirt and the gas station stuff, make sure you check out our episode on Kratom. So that was kind of our part one, right? About gas station supplements, as we're calling them. And this is our part two. So we covered Kratom in part one. And here we are talking about Delta-8 part. Let's go.
Yeah, and Joon wanted to do a part 3 on dick enhancement pills, and I was like, no thanks, Joon. No thanks.
I got no say in this show. You're a dictator, Logan.
I guess so. Okay, so I think we should break down some basic definitions for the listeners. For the listeners who don't know, Joon and I are both resident physicians in psychiatry residency. So we're almost done with residency. We're training to be psychiatrists, but we're not psychiatrists yet. So we're almost experts to talk about this. I don't know. We're both doctors.
I kind of think about it as like we talked about before we started recording, Logan. Like a lot of these topics that we discussed on these shows definitely have a very big relevance to the world of mental health. But like, in the previous episode, we talked about our frustrations that none of this is included in our actual training. So we don't get much formal training in these supplements. And we are basically learning as we go along, and hopefully, just trying our best to teach you guys, the audience, what we're learning as well, because we do think there's lots to be said about Delta-8 and of course Delta-9, and it is very relevant in the field of psychiatry, especially in light of how abysmal the mental health of our country is, and just projecting out long term, it seems like the struggle is going to continue. And Delta-8 is something that's gaining popularity. It's definitely impacting the mental health of our communities. So as mental health professionals, I think we have an obligation to become familiar with these topics at the very minimum. Hopefully we'll become experts one day. So like you said, Logan, we're on our way to becoming experts. Not quite there yet, but we still have a ton of relevant information to share with you guys today.
All right, let's break down some definition of good old weed, marijuana, or cannabis. Okay, so the most psychoactive component or cannabinoid in marijuana is Delta-9 THC, tetrahydrocannabinol. So when you hear regular THC, most of the time they're referring to Delta-9. This is the substance that is defined as a still Scheduled 1 substance under the FDA, meaning it's, of course, illegal on a federal level. Of course, there's a lot of states, I don't even remember off the top of my head, that have now legalized it at a state level. You can buy it recreationally, or, of course, if you have a medicinal card. But Delta-8 is a little bit different. Delta-8 is typically a minor cannabinoid found in cannabis. It's less potent compared to its Delta-9, but it can have similar psychoactive effects, including lethargy, tachycardia, psychosis, even at higher doses. And how it's made, I think, is very, very interesting. And that's how it kind of skates around some of the legality. Are you familiar with how Delta-8 is made?
Yes, I am. Are you talking about the manufacturing process?
Right. And how it's kind of legal.
Right. Wait, hold on, Logan. Before you dive in a little bit further, I want to kind of throw out my definition of what Delta-8 is and what Delta-9 is. All right, and let me know if you agree with me. Because I was getting like kind of confused as I was researching this. I was like, Delta-8, Delta-9, like which one's which. Kept tripping over myself. So after much thought, the most simplest way that I can explain it is Delta-8 is basically considered to be a hemp derivative. So it's a hemp-based product, right? And Delta-9, like you said, Logan, is is what we would associate with typical like marijuana, right? Marijuana. So marijuana and hemp are both they're both cannabis plants. But the difference between the two is that it's actually the concentration of Delta-9 THC. So for marijuana, it generally has about a 15% concentration of Delta-9 THC. For it to be legally defined as hemp, it has to cannabis tree has to contain less than 0.3% Delta-9 THC.
Right.
So that's like the main distinction there. And I also want to highlight, are you familiar with like the Farm Bill, actually?
Yes, I was going to talk about that. The agricultural.
Let's do it. Tell me about it.
The Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018 removed hemp and hemp products containing, like you said, less than 0.3% THC, remember Delta-9, from legal definitions of marijuana. So importantly for Delta-8, Delta-8 is defined as an isomer of CBD and a derivative of CBD. So that's how the Delta-8 actually gets around the legality. So technically, sort of, I mean, it's up for debate, but from a federal level, that's how Delta-8 can skate around all of this and be sold, once again, at like gas stations and stuff.
Right. And a key point regarding that Farm Bill, which was actually passed in 2018, that's the one that defined, hemp products. It basically made hemp products legal, right? And the federal definition included in that bill was that hemp products has to contain Delta-9 THC, that's less than 0.3%, as we said. But it did not specify any contingencies about the level of Delta-8 THC. So basically, that's a little bit of a loophole that was used by the hemp industry to create these alternative products that's being marketed in our gas stations and wherever else you find these products. Right. So it's a legal loophole. So it is a little bit contentious. Yeah, gotta love those, right? It is a little bit contentious, and we are gonna dive into the details of all of that.
Right. Smells the same, looks the same, but unless you get it under like a microscope or some kind of, I actually don't even know how they would test.
Well, I guess you have to really analyze the components of it.
Right. And what I think is extremely kind of interesting is in the research, and I'll try to find it in the research that I wrote down, but a lot of the times that the Delta-8 that can be purchased in these stores, gas stations or whatever, it's not always just Delta-8. It may actually truly have some of that Delta-9 in there, or maybe some other derivatives as well. So you might not actually be even purchasing true Delta-8 cannabis.
Exactly. And why is that, Dr. Noone? It's because it's an unregulated substance.
Unregulated.
So this is one of those supplements that's considered a food products. It's not really regulated by the FDA. And what I mean by that is it's not regulated in terms of there's no testing that's done. There's no approval of safety by the FDA before it hits the shelves. The FDA only gets involved if there's an issue, and they'll remove these products.
Right.
So you could be buying something that's faulty. And actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is one of the common reasons that's brought up when we talk about concerns about Delta-8 rather, because it is an unregulated product, and there is a legitimate concern that you're not, just like with any other supplement or unregulated product, there is this real risk that you're not actually getting what you paid for. So actually, there was this paper that was published by University of Rochester, upstate New York, and they tested 27 Delta-8 products. And what they found was that none of the 27 Delta-8 products tested contained the amount of Delta-8 that they claimed. What's even more interesting is that all 27, all of them, have potentially harmful byproducts, presumably from the manufacturing process, including lead and mercury. All 27, like every single one that they looked at had an issue with it. Wow. Yeah, we got to be careful when we buy supplements.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would necessarily call this a supplement. I mean, I guess lack of better word, because you can buy it, like we keep saying, in gas stations. I've seen this, 7-Elevens. It's quite odd.
So how would you classify it? What would
guess
be a
just
more appropriate classification?
a
Gas
drug.
station product?
I mean, look, I just think a drug. Let's not beat around the bush. And I'm one of those people that, to me, caffeine is a drug. I would
Yeah.
even argue sugar potentially could be a drug because we are eliciting a response in our brain. So we're ingesting some product, whether that's caffeine, THC, Delta-8 or Delta-9, alcohol, nicotine. Who really gives a shit? It's a drug that has neurochemical changes. And I
And I
guess
think
I should
that's
not.
fair. I think that's very fair because
Right.
it does have a lot of similarities to Delta-9 or the regular THC marijuana that we're used to.
So, and I actually kind of misspoke. I shouldn't always say neurochemical because I kind of want to break this down. So, when let's talk about cannabis a little bit more globally. So, cannabis hits on a lot of receptors. I don't consider myself a cannabis expert, but two main receptors: CB1 and CB2. So let's break those down and define those. CB1 is found in the central nervous system. So that's your brain, your spinal cord, and your nerves. So CB1 is found in the central nervous system, including basal ganglia, the substantial nigra, cerebellum, hippocampus, cerebral cortex. It acts by inhibiting some releases and inducing some releases of like acetylcholine, glutamate, GABA, norepinephrine, dopamine, tryptophan. So CB2 is found a little bit more peripherally in immune system tissues mostly. Or I guess CB2 is found in peripheral nerve terminals. I guess I misspoke earlier. My apologies. And so CB2 plays more of a role in the regulation of immune responses and inflammatory reactions. So I'm sure I put half of the listeners asleep. I apologize. But this is why I brought this up. So my understanding, the biggest difference between Delta-8 and Delta-9 is the affinity or how firm that the chemical binds to the CB1 receptor. That's the in your brain, remember, what makes it psychoactive. So Delta-8 is a partial agonist of the CB1. And when it's compared to Delta-9, I think that's kind of up for debate, but it seems to have a weaker potency, a weaker affinity for this receptor. What is your understanding between Delta-8, Delta-9 on that CB1 receptor?
Yeah, that's pretty much what I found in my research as well. So I'm probably just going to summarize what you said. When we talk about regular marijuana, right? This is Delta-9 THC. It binds with strong affinity to the CB1 and the CB2 receptors. CB1 is responsible for the psychoactive effects. So, that's why you get high, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the receptor that it's hitting, and you get the effects of marijuana. CB2, like you said, it has a role in inflammation. So its medicinal purposes are thought to be more related to CB2 than CB1. All right, so that's Delta-9. That's marijuana, right? So when we look at Delta-8, what it does is it doesn't bind to the CB1, which is the psychoactive component, as strongly, but it binds with similar strength to the CB2 receptor. So basically what that means is it doesn't get you high, but you can potentially still get the whatever medicinal benefits that marijuana is claimed to have. You would theoretically be able to get the same kind of benefits. So I mean, interestingly enough, I did find in my research that one of the groups of people that are really all about using Delta-8 is people that use marijuana for medicinal purposes. They really like the fact that they can get all these positive benefits of marijuana, but it doesn't make them groggy, it doesn't make them high, they can still be functional. So yes, it has quite popular support within that community.
Right. I mean, but I also would disagree with that a little bit. If you're using marijuana for some medicinal purposes, and I know that's up for debate, right? But if it has immune responses or inflammatory reaction, I think that totally makes sense. Delta-8 versus Delta-9, I don't want necessarily the psychoactive components. However, let's imagine there is that person that is using cannabis medicinally for maybe insomnia, maybe depression, maybe anxiety. I mean, this is up for a lot of debate. Of course, this is not necessarily FDA approved, but there are patients who claim that it helps with those substances. So I don't think we can necessarily say that CB1 has zero medicinal benefits either. That's the point I wanted to make.
Fair enough. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. We don't really know. These have to be researched more thoroughly.
Right, right. So I think one thing that we can really say with certainty is there's been an absolute explosion in Delta-8 sales. Let me see if I can come up with the exact facts. Okay, so and it's hard to really quantify this, right? So let me just give some kind of like how to adjacent indicators that sales are just going through the roof. The rate of Delta-8 THC searches in Google increased by 467% from 2019 to 2020 and 850% from January to August of 2021. So it seems like a lot of people are searching this out. I wish I could say like exactly what the sales are. I feel like a lot of times now you're hearing, I feel like mostly positive things, for lack of a better word, about the Delta-9 industry, how much revenue it's generating, jobs it's creating, tax dollars it's generating. I wish I had those same numbers for Delta-8, but I don't.
All right, Logan, I'm about to show you this little thing. All right, hold on. So I actually found those same numbers too. Yeah, it's just like Delta-8, the popularity and the conversations around Delta-8 is exploding. So this is actually data from Google Trends. So you can kind of see how the people searching for specific terms change over time. So this is the number of people that search for Delta-8. And look at that, Logan. Look at this graph. Like it starts at 2004. The data starts at January 1st, 2004, and it goes all the way to today, right? And it's basically like nothing until like August of 2020, and it just skyrockets the interest in Delta-8. So I'm just wondering, like, what do you think caused that?
I mean, well, of course, that one bill in 2018, like we talked about. But I just think that there has been, of course, a significant attitude change towards cannabis. But although cannabis laws have changed in certain states, they haven't necessarily changed federally. So I wonder if a lot of this is actually composed of those individuals that don't live in states that they can access THC. I find it hard to believe that there's this rich, robust market for people who are seeking out Delta-8. Look, maybe there is some people, I shouldn't say there's none, but I think it's actually more in reality people who can't access Delta-9 in a safe and effective way.
Right. Okay, I think that's a pretty reasonable explanation. And like just speculating here, but around the time that search for Delta-8 skyrockets, I think that is around the time where more and more states started legalizing marijuana. And maybe individuals in states where marijuana is not legal kind of saw the trend and they're like, oh, like, well, like I'm missing out or whatever. And they started to search for alternatives, and they found Delta-8, which is quote unquote a legal way to get high, right, as purported by certain individuals.
Right.
And that leads me to another very interesting question that I want you to consider, Logan, because one of the questions surrounding Delta-8 is, because we know that a lot of people who use Delta-8, a lot of them, like you said, tend to be from states where marijuana is illegal. Do you think if marijuana was federally legalized and we had dispensaries in all 50 states here in the United States, do you think there still would be a market for Delta-8?
Maybe then it would actually get after those individuals that don't like the psychoactive components of cannabis, but they are trying to go after some more of that CB2 benefit. I think that's possible, but I imagine those individuals are probably also just using regular CBD, because it's my understanding that CBD does bind to the CB2 receptor. So I guess I'm not really sure. That's a very good question. What it also has me think about, I was laughing. I've never heard some of these terms, but let me see if I can. Okay, Delta-8 is also referred as THC light, diet weed.
THC light, diet weed. Oh, I love that.
Work weed. So
I like that one, work weed.
Yeah, like, it kind of, I don't drink anymore, but it kind of made me think about like Bud Light, or, think about this as from a more science level. Here's one study that I would love to see. There is some very clear indications, right, that using cannabis before the age of 25 increases your propensity to have a psychotic episode, most in line typically with schizophrenia. I wonder if consumption of Delta-8 would produce similar effects or if it would be less. Now, I do think one fair criticism about the whole Delta-8 movement is, people dose this themselves. They're not typically dosing, I'm going to ingest 10 milligrams of Delta-8. Look, that might happen in an edible formulary, but when it's in a smoking component, what this one article was talking about, don't users just titrate to the dose that they're seeking? So therefore, if they're used to smoking Delta-9 and then they consume Delta-8, aren't they just going to therefore consume more Delta-8 to get that response they want? And therefore it mitigates against that risk that I was talking about with schizophrenia. I mean, what do you think?
Right. I think that's a great point, Logan. And what I think is, look, let's think about that individual who's using Delta-8 because they're residing in a state where cannabis is illegal, right? We talked about the affinity of Delta-8 to the CB1 receptor, right? Versus marijuana, which binds that receptor a little bit more strongly. So it's not as psychoactive. So what does that really mean? If that individual is looking to get high, it's very easy to get around that low affinity. How do we do that? Well, just smoke a ton of it or eat a ton of edibles, right? You just ingest more and more and more until you can achieve that level of high that individual is looking for. But at the same time, and I'm sure we're going to discuss the manufacturing process a little bit more in detail, right? Again, these are unregulated products. These plants, these cannabis plants are very complicated. Delta-8, we're talking about Delta-8, Delta-9. However, we have to recognize that there's hundreds of components to cannabis plants, right? CBD we commonly hear about, but Delta-8 and 9, like we're talking about in this study, that it's a very small percentage of the actual makeup of these cannabis plants. And again, this is an area where we need to do more research. And with the manufacturing process that these substances go through, there is also concerns like I referenced that study earlier, contamination from other, from that manufacturing process. So if that individual has to be exposed to a higher level of Delta-8 to achieve the same effect, how much of these additional compounds are we exposing that individual to?
Right.
A lot,
right.
A ton. Yeah. And it can't be too good for them.
Right. And, one thing that I think is probably the most important to really understand from this discussion, Delta-8 is present in negligible levels in the cannabis plant. Let me say that again. Delta-8 is almost not really there in the regular cannabis plant. So, a lot of people that we both have interacted, screw you, doc, I'm not taking Lexapro. I'm all natural, baby. I just want to take these natural supplements. Okay, at least realize with this Delta-8 formulary, it's not growing naturally. This is not natural. Nearly all Delta-8 THC sold to consumers come from a derivative of CBD. They have to mess with this in a laboratory, or maybe it's genetically modified so it can grow a little bit, but it's not natural in any way, shape, or form.
And it's also unregulated, so they can potentially add in anything. It can be an unsanitary environment that they're synthesizing these components in. And I'm sure each and every producer has their own manufacturing process as well. So there's no standardization. There's no federal governing body that's making sure everybody is, adhering to those set standards. So there's a lot of areas where things can go wrong. Like that study, they looked at 27 Delta-8 products, and all 27 had different level of Delta-8 than was purported, and they also were contaminated, like all of them. Like that's crazy.
Right. And actually that kind of then makes sense with this point I wanted to make. Let me show you this, Joon. Window. Wait, here we go. Okay, let me show you this, Joon. Okay, so I thought this was very interesting. States where Delta-8 was banned. And if you can't see this, I'll read it off for you. After the 2018 Farm Bill that we talked about. Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Colorado, Delaware, Idaho, Iowa, Mississippi, Montana, North Dakota, Rhode Island, Washington. 2 states passed regulatory authority to their marijuana programs, and those bodies decided to ban it. California was on that list. So let's go ahead and look at the map. Let's see. So it's banned. Here we go. So, looking at this here, states like California, Washington, states and Colorado, that of course like pioneered the marijuana movement, are the states that deciding to ban Delta-8. This was very surprising to me. I mean, when you see this graph or this picture mnemonic, what do you think of, June?
I mean, I had the same exact thought. I was surprised to see Washington on there. Um, like you, Colorado, California. I mean, they sell weed, and they also. I mean, I think California. I'm not sure what exactly their laws are, but maybe it was Oregon. I know Oregon like sells everything. I don't know if
Right.
California is like that. I don't think Washington is like that. But
No. Yeah, Oregon is a free for all at this
they
point.
have they have everything. Like if you're already selling marijuana, like what is the hesitancy to offering Delta-8? I guess because it's unregulated, they might have concerns over what's in the products. So I don't know, maybe that's what it is. But again, this is because this is an unregulated product, right? So it's up to every single state to make up their own laws and regulations surrounding this substance.
Okay, June. We have been speaking for 20-ish minutes on Delta-8. Let's just give like final messages, final thoughts to people maybe considering consuming this product, or what would you think?
Well, Logan, before we go to that, I do have a question that I want to ask you, and I really want to make sure that I get this into the podcast. So we talked extensively about our speculation that a lot of this popularity amongst Delta-8 is in states where marijuana is not legal, right? So it's a marijuana alternative. Do you think people that have access to Delta-9 or the regular marijuana, do you think they also are seeking out Delta-8?
Well, I mean, here's, I think, a very interesting point that I think is extremely fair. The marijuana of the 1970s, traditional marijuana, I'm calling Delta-9 marijuana, is not nearly as strong as it is today, right? I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think that's
I
a
do.
pretty
You want
pretty
the
well
numbers?
understood thing. Let me just make this point. So for that consumer that uses this new age fucking super duper cannabis and has a very bad time, perhaps that is the type of person that would have a safer consumption practice with Delta-8. I also wonder if I would love to see a study side by side if there is the same rates of psychosis from Delta-8 versus Delta-9. I don't know if that's feasible.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, as far as I know, there's been no clinical trials done looking at the rate of psychosis, but users, fans of Delta-8, claim that they're able to, achieve the positive benefits. In this case, like for example, like pain relief, relaxation, without being as anxious or as paranoid as when they use regular Delta-9 marijuana.
Interesting.
So
I mean,
maybe,
and from
yeah.
a
So we can
molecular
speculate.
level, yeah, from
Yeah.
a molecular level, we talked about the CB1 receptor affinity. I do actually I think that makes a lot of sense. I, of course, like you keep highlighting, I have extreme safety concerns, if there's lead products or whatever other, unhealthy carcinogens are found in this stuff.
Understandable. All right. Would you be surprised if I told you 16% of regular marijuana users also use Delta-8?
I wonder where they're getting those.
It's not a small
Yeah,
number,
it's not
16%.
small, and I also wonder, how many people perhaps are consuming this product, and they don't even realize it. Because one thing that I found in my research is that it's typically cheaper, easier to access. You can order this shit online, and it's not regulated the same way that other THC is. And I know we keep talking about the safety profile, but I at least know in a fair amount of states they can't sell THC products that look like kids' candy necessarily, because of course there's extreme concern that children could consume these products. There have been presentations to the ER where individuals who are kids accidentally or maybe intentionally consume these products. Because of the lack of regulation around Delta-8, I can imagine that there are manufacturers that produce Starburst, excuse me, that Delta-8 Starburst.
Yeah, that's a great point. Actually, I have some numbers around that as well. So, looking from, let's see when this is. between January 1st of 2021 and February 28th of 2022, so in the course of 13 months. So this is numbers from the National Poison Control Center. They received 2,362 exposure cases of Delta-8 THC products between those 13 months. All right. So out of those calls that they received, so out of the 2,362 calls that they received about Delta-8 THC exposure, 40% involved unintentional exposure to Delta-8 THC. And out of the 40%, 82% of those involved unintentional exposure, which affected pediatric patients.
Wow.
So kids.
Yeah.
I'd imagine not a small proportion of those kids may have looked at the wrappers, because it looks like I've seen some pictures and it's like nurse robe. It's like it made in the image of candies that we typically see at Walmart and stuff. So, right. I do understand that can be a real possibility that your kid can get into your drawer. They see it. They're like, oh, yeah, I want some candy. Is mom looking? No, let me try to eat a bunch of them while she's not looking. Yeah, right. So that can definitely happen. But I also want to bring your attention, Logan, to a survey of Delta-8 users. And I think this has some pretty interesting implications. So this was actually a survey that was conducted by Jessica Kruger, and she is a professor of health behavior at University of Buffalo. Okay, so Delta-8 users, they reported, they were asking like, why do you use Delta-8, right? Okay, so Delta-8 users reported that they have a quote unquote nicer high. They reported relaxation, euphoria, and pain relief. People did report difficulty concentrating, problems with short-term memory, and altered sense of time. However, it was not to the same extent as with regular Delta-9 marijuana. So I am thinking about what you said about work weed and THC light. So I think a lot of people use this because it does give them, maybe like the feeling that they enjoy with regular THC, but it also doesn't like put them on the couch. Right. It doesn't make you like run. It doesn't. It still allows you to function, go do your daily activities. So I think people use it to maybe just to take the edge off a little bit, but still be functional.
Right. And what I also think is important, and there is, of course, no definitive science on this, but from my research, they theorize that THC Delta-8 will likely still pop positive on urine drug screens. I haven't seen any like definitive science. I think that would be a very interesting trial to run. But just to make our listeners more aware, Delta-8 may cross-react with standard urine THC drug tests.
Absolutely. All right, Logan.
It's only different by like one double bonded helical structure. Actually, not helical. It's a circle. Sorry, hexagon.
Right. Yeah. So if you have a drug test to pass, do not use Delta-8. Don't use Delta-9 either. Of course, that should be obvious.
That's probably all the people will pull out of this great episode. Well, hey, if you made it 30 minutes into listening to two bumbling idiots, psych residents talk about Delta-8, thank you so much for tuning in. Please send this to someone who you think would appreciate it. Like and subscribe. Cheers. Thanks for tuning in.